Welcome everyone to another observability clinic. Today's topic is Dynatrace Extensions for Visual Studio Code. I have a guest back with me, Radu Stefan. Hi, how are you doing?
Hi, Servus Andy. I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Very good. Hey, thank you so much for coming back. And it's really great that you are enlightening us and our watchers, like our viewers here, on how to build a Dynatrace extension with Visual Studio Code. And, without further ado, folks, this is for everyone that wants to extend the Dynatrace capabilities. You will show us how this works. You will also, I think, give us a little overview of what the extensions are in general. But I don't want to steal any more of your thunder. If you just take us through it. And folks, if you have questions, a great place to start is always the community. A great place to start is always just leaving a comment on the video itself. We will watch out for those. But yeah, Radu, over to you.
Thank you very much, Andy, for that introduction. And for those who don't know me, I'm a lead architect in the Dynatrace platform extensions team. So really building extensions is something that I do every single day of the week. That's why it's my pleasure to be able to share with you one of the latest toolkits that we've been using internally as part of the team and that we want to open up to all of our customers and users and everyone who wants to build better Dynatrace extensions. So for today's session, because I want to ramp up towards the toolkit, we'll do a bit of a refresher on Dynatrace extensions, just so that, whether you're completely new to the topic or you've already tried to develop one or two extensions, everyone kind of speaks the same language. And then we'll go into how you can make use of this extension for Visual Studio Code to help you with your Dynatrace extension projects. We'll finally wrap it up with a bit of a look into the future, what's to come for the project. And then you'll have access to some useful links with the documentation, the project on GitHub, and other resources. So to jump into it, Dynatrace extensions, just what exactly are they? And it's not going to be a complete discussion on the architecture. We already have a really good episode from, even though it's from about a couple of years ago when the new framework just came out, the content is still relevant, and everyone should go watch that for a more complete picture of where we are right now. But if you were to ask me to summarize a Dynatrace extension in just a few words, I would put it as specialized data acquisition and customization at scale. So let's break that down a little bit. Specialized data acquisition at scale. Typically what you do in Dynatrace when you're working with extensions, you're going to go to the hub in your environment. The hub is the main place for managing extensions, whether it's something that you've built or something that Dynatrace officially published online. All of them are managed from the same central hub. From there, to actually start monitoring some endpoints, some technologies out there, and start gathering some data, you'll be creating a monitoring configuration. In concrete terms, the extension is a package that knows what needs to be monitored and how it should be presented in the platform. But without a monitoring configuration, we don't know actually where those endpoints are, those devices, those technologies, those processes, those URLs, whatever it may be out there that we're trying to get the data from. And after we've set up a monitoring configuration, this is where the scale part starts coming in. Monitoring configurations, each extension can have multiple instances of them, and each of them is assigned to active gates and to one agent. So when you start multiplying the number of endpoints, active gates, monitoring configurations, you start to realize that you can build a complete picture of monitoring everything in your estate that you need to have a view on. To give people a bit of an insight, active gates and one agents still don't really know how to collect that data. Internally, they leverage these data sources, which are specialized processes that have all of the knowledge on how to connect through a certain protocol and actually collect that data. So We might have a data source for SNMP to monitor our network devices, for WMI to do queries on Windows devices, for Prometheus to scrape exporters, and quite a few others. Most recently, to the Extensions 2.0 framework, we've added the Python data source. So with Python, you're able to run any code you can imagine, and there's no more boundaries as to what you can touch out there and what data you can bring in the platform. At this point, it all becomes a back and forth between the data source, your endpoints, whether they are local or remote, to bring in that data and to have the rest of the platform make sense of it and organize it in terms of entities, screens, and so on. So this kind of handles the data acquisition and the scale part. But what do I mean by customization? And this is where a lot of our users, or at least the first-time users, don't really realize that a Dynatrace extension is really a domain-specific knowledge package bundled all into one. It's not just about bringing data into the platform. If you're working with logs, we can augment the processing pipeline for those logs so we can transform that data before we work with it. For metrics, we can add metadata to tell the Davis AI, should this metric be considered for the root cause part of a problem, for the impact analysis? What is a human readable name that we should refer to it by? What's the measurement unit? We then make sense of all of these signals in the context of topology. So with entities and relationships, we can accurately model the system that we're monitoring. We then have unified analysis screens, so we don't have to create hundreds of dashboards for every single entity. Instead, we write a screen once, and that gets applied to all of our entities. We can, of course, still bundle dashboards because those are useful as overviews for what the extension is really representing. And also alerts so that we have those entry points to any problem detection. And most of our first-time users don't realize that actually when you deploy an extension, you're touching on all of these different areas of the platform. So before we jump into extension development, Andy, would you say that was a fair summary? Would you have any questions at this point?
Yeah, no, I think this was a perfect, I think, overview as well, what extensions are. And I think the way you explain it best is that with Dynatrace, we provide you with a lot of access to different type of data sources. Now, there are certain components, however, where domain knowledge is needed to figure out what type of data from which data sources we want to pull in, and then how we want to present this data to Dynatrace users. You mentioned the unified analysis screens where you can say, this is the type of data that I want to have for an F5 load balancer. This is what I want to have for a different type of network component or software component. So I think this is really great. We allow you, our users, and this could be end users or also our partners, to build extensions where in a package, you are basically letting Dynatrace know what type of data to collect for certain technologies and how to represent this data. Now, you also mentioned that you can also, an extension can automatically configure some alerts, some processing rules as we're ingesting logs. So it's really a domain-specific package that is the domain knowledge package, which is really, I think, the power of these extensions. And now the question is, how am I going to build an extension if I have a particular technology, a particular stack of my technology that I want Dynatrace to, out of the box, better collect the data that's relevant and present me that data so that it makes sense to me?
Absolutely, and this is really what I want the focus of today's session to be. It's a session aimed at developers, aimed at people who want to write these things, create these extensions themselves. So I've kind of broken it down into a logical step-by-step. What would a first-time user do? And the very first step, because we've built in that automatic distribution of these extensions and automatic scheduling on active gates and one agents, the first step is to also have some security in there, because you cannot have packages that are coming from just any source be distributed throughout your entire estate. So we use a set of developer certificates so that both the platform and the OneAgent and Active Gates can verify that these extension packages are coming from an approved source. So the first step is to use either OpenSSL, which is a open source command line utility, vendor agnostic, and also the DTCLI, which is our own deliverable for a command line utility that allows you to create these files. You'll create two different certificates. One of them is known as the CA, or Certificate Authority, and then the developer certificate, and these two have different roles. So the CA certificate will have to upload it in Dynatrace's credential vault, and also upload it to the file system of OneAgent and Active Gates that will run our extensions. It's a file that can be used to verify digital signatures to make sure that they're coming from trusted sources. The developer certificate, that will be used as we're building our extension to create those digital signatures that go along with our package. So at this point, it can already be a bit of an intimidating step, as OpenSSL is not as intuitive of a command. And even though we've managed to compress everything in a very simple step with our DTCLI utility, it does rely on Python. So it does require you to install Python on your development machine. I'll walk you through how we've addressed that in our latest toolkit. But for now, I just want to walk you through all of the steps one by one before we show you how to automate it all. So the next step is to actually create your extension. You'll have a manifest, which is nothing more than a YAML file, is very structured and tells the data source what you want collected and how you want it reported in the platform. If you're bundling dashboards and alerts with your extension, these are just JSON files that can be all added in the same package. By package, we mean nothing more than just an archive of these files, nothing special in there. And once you've created that archive, you'll use your developer certificate to generate the digital signature that matches that extension archive. And this is important because now these two files together are what form an actual package that the platform will recognize as a valid extension that comes from a trusted source. Once we've uploaded this to the hub, which again is the central place for managing extensions, it will show up with this initial status of a new version available, but this version is not active yet. So we'll need to activate it. The status changes to an active version of the extension, and now we have the ability to add configurations. And of course, every time we make a change, we modify our manifest, we create a new archive, we sign it again, we create a new package that we upload. So we repeat most part of these steps every time we do a change.
Radu, can I ask one quick question?
Yes.
Just for clarification, for me, this all makes sense, right? We want to make sure that an extension that includes configuration, but potentially also code, because you mentioned earlier that we now also provide a Python as a data source. It all makes sense that we need to package it up and sign it. When you say uploading it to the hub, does this mean that initially the extension is only available for me in my Dynatrace environment, in my Dynatrace tenant? Or does the hub also mean it's available for everyone out there in the Dynatrace community?
That's a very good question, actually. So by the hub, I mean the hub that you see in your environment, in the product, in Dynatrace. Indeed, the public dynatrace.com/hub, that's also referred to as the hub. And you'll notice that that's reflected in your environment as well. Currently, partners and Dynatrace developers can upload to the hub, but regular users only have access to their own in-product hub. So they upload their extension in there, it becomes available within their environment, but other users don't have access to it immediately.
Yeah. Oh, perfect. That's a clarification, which also makes a lot of sense. Most of you users out there that want to build an extension, you probably want to use this for your environment, I assume. So that's why when you upload something, it is available in your Dynatrace environment only. And I'm sure there's ways in case you want to reach out and want to make it available to a broader audience, then reach out to our partner team or to, folks like you, Radu, and say, hey, I have something really cool that I built. How can I get this to a larger audience? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. And at that point, that's how it makes its way into everyone's environment through our online hub. Mm-hmm. So this fairly lengthy process is really what triggered the need to create something to automate it to work better. And this is my segue into the extension for VS Code. It's our latest tool set that we started using internally, and we've opened up to the entire community out there. So it's completely open source, and it's publicly available from the Visual Studio Code marketplace. At the very essence, it connects your editor to your Dynatrace environment. If you remember our last episode, I prepared with me a few scripts that were skipping some steps. This is the natural evolution of let's build those scripts into the editor so we don't have to move them around and we don't have to care about where they're stored and how they're doing. VS Code also puts forward for us a very powerful engine that allows us to do some really cool things. And we really wanted to hit on 3 different areas with this project. Number 1, operational efficiency. As you're starting to create multiple projects for extensions, you should have the ability to easily switch between them. You should be able to work with your environment, but at the same time with multiple environments. So if you need to deploy the same extension across different environments, you should be able to quickly switch between them. And needless to say, of course, building, signing, deploying, configuring should be done in an automated way very quickly. With the VS Code engine and with the fact that now our extensions are declarative, just using a YAML structure, this opens up a whole possibility for automating content. So actually the extension can generate for you unified analysis screens, dashboards, and alerts from the data that you have in your extension manifest. You can also, for certain types of data sources, connect with the data. So you can scrape metrics from a Prometheus exporter, for example, and drop them straight into your manifest. For a WMI extension, you can run those queries onto your local system and bring in those metrics and dimensions. And finally, content validation. I didn't mention this in this session, but indeed, if you want to actually know what's allowed and not allowed in that YAML manifest or get suggestions for possible values at every step of the way, you need to download a set of schemas from either your Dynatrace environment or our public GitHub repository to actually apply those to the manifest so that you get these highlights when you're doing things wrong. The VS Code extension allows us to do this behind the scenes very seamlessly. You don't have to worry about where those files are stored, and you can easily switch between versions. And we've also added a couple of our own custom diagnostics that go a little bit beyond what's contained in the schema. So this has been a lot of talk and not enough showing. So I'd like at this point to jump into the demo part of the session. So what I've done for the demo part is I've completely wiped out my environment. So I'll be starting the same way as a regular first-time extension developer would. I'll go to the extensions menu in my VS Code editor, and I'll search for Dynatrace. A couple of entries are going to show up, but Dynatrace Extensions is the one that I want to install. And it's just a click of a button, and the extension is now installed and available. So you can now make use of the full functionality of it. You'll notice that you have a new menu icon in here, and this is your first contact with this extension. So we have 2 views, one for workspaces where we'll find all of our projects, and one for environments where we'll be able to keep track of all the environments that we're managing. So before we actually connect our environment, we need to create an access token so that we can actually allow the editor to authenticate with our environment. I'll do just that. So from my menu, I'll go to access tokens and generate a new token in here. I'll name it clinic demo, and I'll set this to expire tomorrow, although I'll delete it probably sooner than that. You can search for extension in here just because you'll need all of the scopes to manage your extension configurations at extension level and environment level. Also, we'll need to see the extensions that you have deployed. Reading metrics and entities is going to be helpful because we'll allow you to validate any metric and entity selectors. So we'll need to be able to read those entities and make queries about them. The credential vault access will be needed because we'll allow you to manage your certificates through the editor. And then finally, a couple of our settings, especially around converting JMX extensions from the old format to the new one, require some access to actual settings, but these aren't used by all features of the extension for VS Code. So if you're a little bit not trusting of it, you can drop those permissions. But for this demo, I'll enable everything so we can get the full power of this integration. So now that I've enabled all of the scopes that I need, I'll generate this token. I'll copy this and paste it somewhere off screen. Now what we'll do is come back to our editor, and it's time to connect our environment. Just one last thing, I'll copy my base URL because I'll need that to access it in VS Code. So I'll add the environment. The first thing that we need to provide is the URL, which I've just copied. I will then add the token that I've just prepared. And finally, a label, just so I can recognize this. So this is my Sprint tenant, and I'll set this as my current environment. And we can see that the environment shows up in here, and I have a confirmation that I'm using this environment for API calls. Already, I can expand the list, and I can see all of the extensions that I'm currently working with on my environment. And whenever we have configurations, the next level down that list shows me the status of configurations, the name of it, and I can make any changes from here, delete it, or save it to a file in my current workspace.
So Radu, again, for clarification, what you just did is you basically connected your Visual Studio Code where you have installed the Dynatrace extension with your Dynatrace environment. The token that you just created, the access token, is really just for that integration to work properly, and it's really nice. You have Radu Sprint environment here configured. You actually, thanks to all of these privileges you gave to your token, you can see all of the extensions and you can see the individual configurations. So that's really helpful. But this is what this token was all about, to really set up this integration between Visual Studio Code and Dynatrace, yeah?
Yes. So now it's time to create a workspace. So I'll first want to open a folder. So in my demos, I've created a folder in here for our clinic. And the first extension that I want to show you is how we can build an automated Prometheus one. So I'll call this Prometheus Kafka. And this is essentially the folder where I'll want to work with this project and with the extension. So I'll select it. My editor opens it for me. It's a blank folder, so nothing in there already. And the first step is to actually initialize this. So get a base folder structure, the validation schemas and so on, and get working with a new project. For this, I'll press F1 on my keyboard, and F1 brings me the command palette for VS Code. everything that the extension can do is prefixed with Dynatrace extensions. So you can see we have a lot of workflows that allow us to work with extensions. And the very first one that I recommend everyone to go through is to initialize this new workspace that we've just opened. So we'll just go through that. The first step is to select what version of a schema we want to work with, and this is taken straight from my environment. So I know exactly what's available, how far back I can go with making this extension support different active gates and one agents out there. So I'll go with 275. It's not the most recent one. It's pretty stable, so I'll just go with that. All of my files were already downloaded, so now it's all set up and ready to validate. The next step is those certificates that I just mentioned. And assuming that I'm a new user, I won't have existing certificates yet. So let's generate those. I'll generate extensions in here. It's been generated already. And now it's asking me, hey, since you've just generated some new credentials, do you want to use these for all of your workspaces? I'll say, why not? This will add it to my global settings in VS Code. Otherwise, I would have just used it for this workspace alone. And now the logical step is, do you want to upload this certificate authority file to Dynatrace, to the credentials vault? And I'll do that. So this is my CA certificate for the clinic. I think I have a few of them, so hopefully I'm not overwriting something else. A bit of a description, yeah, my CA certificate for the clinic session. And now that's been uploaded. So because the the editor detected that I have a one agent running on my local machine, it's also asking me if I want to distribute it already to that component. I'll skip that for now, and because I took a little bit too much with that step, the prompt disappeared. So I'll have to bring it up again from the bar. Okay, so I won't distribute it at this point because we're not going to use my local one agent. And now we have a series of templates that can start our project already. So we can create just a very basic extension. We can create a Python extension. So this will actually create a new Python project for us. We can convert a JMX extension from our old framework into the new format. Or we can actually download one of our existing extensions that's already deployed on the environment. So I don't want to complicate it too much. I'll just choose the standard option here for extension 2.0. And finally, now my, my workspace is initialized. So what did we actually do? First of all, we've registered this workspace in our view here. So we can see the extension that we're working on. We can see that it's a registered workspace. In the files, we have a dist directory where every single built package will get placed. We have a folder to put any monitoring configurations that we want. We have our extension directory already with a little bit of a starting code here and with the schema validation for our version that we selected. Finally, VS Code also updated the settings so that the schema validation is working correctly. And if I look at my preferences, because I updated my global settings, I can see that my new certificates have been set up to be used globally for all of the workspaces that I'm working with. What I'll have to do now on my own is, because I'm using a different ActiveGate that's not installed on my local system, I'll have to move my CA certificate onto that ActiveGate so that it's able to recognize it as a valid credential. So to do that, I'll just quickly bring my terminal and move this file over. So I'm using a private key here to log into that active gate. Then I'm using the path that the editor used for my file, and I'm uploading it onto my active gate. So I've got the address written down, and I'll put this initially in my home folder in there. And now I'll just move it over into the folder that it needs to be in. So again, as my user, I'll have to use a sudo command just because I don't have permissions on there. So from home, Ubuntu, and this ca.pen file that was created, I'll just move it into the Dynatrace standard location. So in var lib Dynatrace, the remote plugin module, the agent folder, configuration, and finally certificates. It's a bit of a long path. Certificates. And I'll name this as clinicca.pen because I think I already have a file in there.
Let me ask you a question. So that means that the stuff that you're doing is because you have a Dynatrace environment and you have an active gate installed on this machine, and in order later on to run your extension, that active gate needs to have your PEM file. I think this is all automated if you're downloading extensions from the hub, right? There's no...
Exactly. So extensions from the hub use a special certificate that has a root file embedded in every component. So every component is able to recognize it and validate it as a trusted source. But because I'm acting as an independent developer, I have to put my certificate file in there. So just a quick check that I've uploaded it, and this is all that we have to do from the terminal. Now the ActiveGate knows how to recognize it. So, okay, we have this extension. Let's give it a better name. So we're going to be writing today a Prometheus Kafka extension, and everything else is here. Good, I'll change my name in there. And the very first part that I want to show you is when I type Prometheus, VS Code gives me this link in here. Hey, do you want to scrape data from an exporter? This is part of our extension. So we can actually choose either a file that already contains our sample data, just in case we don't have access to the endpoint. Or in my case, I do have access to the endpoint, so I'll just use the details of my Prometheus exporter so that I can bring that data in. So this is my URL, it's just a public exporter. I'll use username and password to authenticate because it does require some authentication details. And the password for it. And now I actually have to scrape that data. And you can see that 19 metrics were pulled in there. I get a timestamp for when we scraped it. And as part of my configuration in here, I can use control space as a way to bring these suggestions into view. I'll have to give my group a name. So metrics, it can be whatever you want. And then in the metrics section of the group is where I would define what metrics do I want to grab from this exporter. And this is where we can already automate. So all of those scraped metrics that we've detected on your exporter, we can make use of them. So I can click insert all scraped metrics, and they've been all added in there with the type detected from the exporter and the syntax for picking up that value from the Prometheus data. And now, of course, this was done in bulk, so we can remove any of these. We can work with the content as we want it. I'll get to the yellow highlights in just one second. For now, I just want to show yet another way that we can bring that data. So a Prometheus exporter also gives some information about what each metric represents. And in Dynatrace, this translates to metric metadata. To add it to an extension, we have the metrics node that supports us adding that. And of course, we can again add the metadata from our exporter. So these are the definitions taken from that endpoint as it's coming from the data. The unit is not part of the exported data for Prometheus, but it's something that we can very easily go in and modify ourselves because, again, bringing control space, we tap into the YAML schema and we bring the suggestions for the values that can be auto-completed in there. So bytes, for example, makes sense to add them as a byte.
So Radu, again, let me recap, and because I really want to understand.
Yes.
And why we have these extensions. And I think you bring the Prometheus example, which is a very prominent example in observability. Now you could go into your Dynatrace environment and you could basically configure Dynatrace to scrape all these Prometheus metrics, and then you could build dashboards and put it on a dashboard. And then if you want to kind of spread this out to multiple Kafka instances, you basically would need to say, I want to scrape it from here, from here, from here, and then you create multiple dashboards. The real exercise here is, as you said in the very beginning, you are basically providing an extension that says, for those users that want to monitor Kafka with Dynatrace, here is the complete configuration on what type of data we want to pull in. In this case, it's Prometheus metrics. And then you also give the description, the display name of every single metric with the data type or with the unit. And I know at a later point, I'm sure you will also then say, hey, instead of creating custom dashboards, we have a unified analysis screens where we give you exactly the view on the key Kafka metrics. And then you could go further and say, hey, for Kafka, there's one of these metrics that is a good health indicator. So we automatically create an alert on it. So I just want to understand and reiterate the power of extensions. It's really taking away a lot of the configuration by packaging up your domain knowledge and saying, this is the data I want to get, this is what the data means, and this is what I want to do with the data. And you can package all this up in an extension. Yeah.
Absolutely. And there are two areas in which this becomes really important. So indeed, probably one of the easiest ways to get Prometheus data into Dynatrace is in the context of Kubernetes, because our operator and our one agent is able to scrape any pods that we annotate that are exporting these metrics. But what happens when, like in my case, my exporter is just a URL somewhere out there outside of Kubernetes? I cannot really make use of that setup. And then the second part is, okay, what if once I have my data in there, I actually want to do more about it? I want to model a topology on top of it. Like you said, maybe make use of the unified analysis screens. That also requires me to start modifying those aspects in the context of an extension.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Thank you.
So the next feature that I wanted to introduce is these additional highlights in here. These are some of those custom diagnostics that are coming from the extension, detecting that hey, something that you've put in here may not be the best practice, even though it's valid from a point of view of the YAML. So what this particular one is highlighting, that I am ingesting gauge type metrics which fluctuate up and down, but I'm using a name syntax that is reserved for count metrics, which are only increasing in value, and we report the difference between intervals. So what Dynatrace will actually do, if you push such a metric as a gauge and it finishes in the suffix of count, the metric key will get rewritten behind the scenes. And actually what will arrive in Dynatrace is a metric key like this. So it's trying to warn me that, hey, later on, if you try to reference anywhere else in the extension this key, you might not be referencing the metric that's actually out there. So To fix that, VS Code allows us to bundle in these quick fix actions. So I can say, okay, fix all of my metric keys and just get rid of that. So I can now have a very clean setup of my data. And it's now time to publish this extension. Let's get it configured. Let's get it added to our environment. And for that, I'll bring my command palette again. This is F1, so it's the F1 key. And I have this build command in here. Build will validate it, bundle it. I have my archive in there, and it's asking me if I want to upload it. And of course, I want to upload it. And of course, I also want to activate it. So now that it's activated, I can open my UI straight from the editor. It navigates to the extension and lands me exactly at the page where I can add a monitoring configuration for my extension. I could do it from here. I could also do it from the editor itself. So if I don't want to leave the editor, I don't have to. I go back to my environment. My list now should show this custom Prometheus Kafka extension, and I can click the plus button to create a new configuration. It's going to generate this structure for me. So I'll just say test first configuration version 001, and I'll add the details of my Prometheus endpoint. The scheme basic, yeah, that's the correct value. And I'll add my username and password. And actually, one thing that I won't be able to do from here, I do not know the value for scope off the top of my head because I don't know my active gates that well. So I'll actually cancel this for now. So I won't save it, and because I provided some incomplete output, that command failed. I'll go through the UI and then I'll show you how we can do it from the editor as well. It's one of the areas where it's still a bit difficult to get correctly because these active gates are referenced by a bit of an awkward syntax that we cannot figure out in advance to help you add that. So this scope syntax that we have in here. So I'll select my active gate from the UI and I'll add my Prometheus endpoint manually. Basic authentication with my username and password. And I'll go to the next step. First config. And I'll allow this to actually go through the activation flow. This will take a few minutes, so it's a good time for any questions.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah, again, a recap. So for me, you have created an extension, which is basically a definition of what type of data do I want Dynatrace to pull from which type of data sources. You added some metric definitions. That's also great because this will make it easier later on to use these metrics in Dynatrace. Now, what you've just done is you've basically uploaded that domain knowledge to Dynatrace, to your environment, and say, hey, now I have my domain knowledge, my configuration here. This is an extension. And now I want Dynatrace to actually execute this extension on a particular active gate against different endpoints. Now, in your case, you only have one endpoint, but you could have 50 Kafka servers, and you can basically configure every single Prometheus endpoint for 50 different Kafkas, but the configuration is always the same. And I assume, and this is just like forward-looking, if all of a sudden Kafka comes up with a new version, with new Prometheus metrics, you could then update your extension and say, from now on, I have 5 additional metrics. And then you can just basically update that extension so that from that point on, Dynatrace will use the latest version of your extension, which means automatically for all of your 50 Kafkas will pull in those 5 additional metrics and whatever else you've specified with these metrics to happen, whether it's alerts, whether it's putting it on a unified analysis screen, on dashboards, and so on.
Absolutely. So what I want to show you a couple of other things. So I did mention that we have this folder where you can work with your configurations. So I'll just do that. Now that I've configured and I know that my configuration is valid, I can go to my extension. So the Kafka one, I have my first configuration in there and I can save this one to a file. I'll leave the name as it is. I can modify it if I want. But now this setup, and in our case, it's very simplistic. We didn't add many details, but some extensions have a lot of configuration in there. I can save a snapshot of that configuration. Of course, whenever I make use of it, we don't expose any password, so I'll have to replace this with the actual password. But now I can use this to create multiple other monitoring configurations in a programmatic way.
Cool. Yeah, that's nice because, as you said, in a programmatic way, coming back to the scale aspect, if you have 50, 100, 1,000 different components you want to monitor, then you do not want to manually configure all of these configurations, these endpoints, but you want to automate that. Yeah.
And now it's kind of getting a bit late in our demo, and I want to speed things up. So I want to actually do things even faster than we've done them so far. If you right-click on any of your registered workspaces, you'll be able to access some settings. Otherwise, you'll have to do them manually through VS Code. So this is just a bit of a shortcut. One of them is the fast development mode. So for those who have already gotten used to developing extensions, fast mode allows you to skip some steps and go much faster with your changes. So every time I hit save on this document, the flow will get triggered automatically and we go from code to activated in not even a second. So one of the things that I cannot generate just out of nowhere is the topology. So I'll add a very simple topology that matches my metrics. Really what we're doing here is just saying wherever you have a Kafka ID, create a Kafka cluster entity, and wherever you also have a topic, create a topic entity. So two simple entities that we show in there with a relationship that the Kafka topic runs on the Kafka cluster. So something simple to give a bit of structure to the data. So now as soon as I save the document, the version was already automatically increased. So we're at 002, the bundle is already there. And if I refresh my view in here, I should already see a new version present in my environment. Nice. So version 002 active. And I think the status here, sometimes it's a little bit behind with the actual events. So yeah, so it picked up this initial error event, but now we're at okay, so it's lagging a little bit behind. But now our extension has topology, so I can update all of my monitoring configurations and get this deployed. Topology, you cannot really visualize topology that well without the unified analysis screens and without the dashboard. So I'll just run very quickly through generating this content, and then we'll go into the environment to see the effects of it. So when you type screens, turns out that so long as we have a topology structure and some idea of what metrics you're collecting, we're able to fully generate all of the unified analysis screens for those entities based on these metrics. This is probably the most significant part of the extension definition. If we go, we've kind of jumped to like 500 lines of YAML, and it's things that we can deduce about the data that you've given us.
So this is really now putting all of the data that we've collected, not only in context, because context you have already specified with topology, but now this extension here, or this nice auto generate, is creating meaningful views to show probably kind of parent-child relationships between data, right? You mentioned you have Kafka clusters, and there's some other, I guess, elements, cluster Kafka is queues, I assume, or topics or whatever it's called. And then you can basically specify here how you want this data to be represented, especially as the relationship between these data points. Yeah, it's really cool.
So I'll save it, and it's already
fast mode. Yeah, that's awesome. That's like fast. Yeah.
You get your feedback here, so you
Uh-huh.
get to see that it's been successful, or if it's failed, you can click to get some details of the failure. You also have some shortcuts in here, so let's open these screens straight away. Let's not fiddle around with URLs or anything like that.
Huh.
We have a view configured. Our cluster is showing up in there. We have the details view showing us metrics for that. Any relationship that we detect will create a card for it. We'll put some basic breadcrumbs so that you can go back to these list views. And it's the same for those child entities as well. So if I go to one of these topics, I'll be able to see the metrics and the relationship back to the cluster, a little breadcrumb. We also put like some standard things like quality of life, like you can go into we put an action so that you can go to the extension configuration from the screen in here. And I'll just update this configuration as well. And let's look what else can we generate. So how about your extension grows, there's the need for a dashboard. So I'll just use the command palette, and we have a command to create a dashboard. And I'll create this dashboard. The default title, I guess, is good enough for now.
Yeah.
It asks you if you want to upload it. We're not going to do this because it's going to get uploaded anyway as part of the bundle, but just in case you wanted to do it before your bundle gets there. And now we also have the dashboard referenced in there. As part of our extension, we have a folder, we have the JSON of the dashboard that we've generated, and let's take a look at what this actually looks like. So we called it something like extension overview. Let's refresh this.
Maybe sorted by modified, huh? Modified date.
Oh, actually, did I save this? I think I did. Let's make sure that we also have the extension activated. So that in here, we're on the latest version. And that our dashboards. Oh, sorry, I may have gone into the wrong dashboards.
So this is where we are. I guess you've created some classic dashboards. Yeah, we have
exactly.
Yeah.
So the classic dashboards, and there we go. We have our extension overview. What this does is it will, again, read through your entities, create a row for each entity type, where it will select one or two of the matching metrics, and it will create a table so that you have a list of all of them and a couple of those key metrics, just to kind of give you an overview of your extension. It gives you a bit of a count in here. So you have one cluster, 19 topics, again, that link to configure this extension, and then, some entry points to the list of topics and the list of clusters. And really what's missing from a complete extension is some alerts. So we have metrics, why don't we have alerts? And we can, of course, create alerts. Again, from those commands, we have a command to create alert. Pick whichever metric you want to create the alert. So let's say server received bytes. After too many bytes received. And this is triggered when we have our condition above a gigabyte of data set. And this has been generated and added in here. Let's also save this.
So all of this configuration is stored as JSON, which is basically our settings 2.0 framework, I would assume, right? It's all
Exactly.
settings.
Yeah. So you could have done the same thing by going in UI, doing your configuration, and then exporting that to a JSON file. So in our settings now, our anomaly detection is able to recognize these as metric events that can be enabled in the environment. So in the metric events section, we'll be able, I think they're added at the very end of the list. Might take a couple of minutes for the configuration to sync.
There we go.
And we have our alert here. So everything that we've added has been configured in there. And of course, as part of the configuration, we're also selecting the correct entity for you, because if we don't select any entity, it will just be attached to the environment, which is not what you want.
Yeah. So in this case, Dynatrace would create a problem. We call it the Davis problem, with the title "too many bytes received," and it will also say this particular value exceeded your condition, and also on the dimension, you know which Kafka cluster actually had the issue.
Yes.
Yeah, that's nice.
So I think that's kind of all that we have for this Prometheus extension. So we've generated alerts based on our metrics, dashboards, we've created the screens. Even inside the screens, just to kind of show people, we can leverage some other features. I did mention that we want to validate the content. So actually, whenever you have a metric selector being mentioned anywhere, you can both just quickly validate it, get a tick or an X if it's valid or not. But you can also query that data. So querying the data gives you this little fancy view using our Strato components actually running inside of VS Code. With some data points, what was the dimension, and get a view of what the data actually looks like in the environment without having to go create charts. Like, you just have to click. And it's the same for whenever we have an entity selector template being mentioned anywhere. Is the same thing. We can validate it, and we can also just query the data and make sure, hey, do these entities, do they have the right properties that we expect them to have? Do they have the right relationships that we expect them to have? It's, let's use this opportunity to validate that what we've added in there reflects what we want, what we know as the expert in that technology, that should be the reality.
It's truly powerful, and especially the I like it that we bring in the data into the tool that you would use as a developer to actually build an extension, which is Visual Studio Code. So you don't really need to leave Visual Studio Code for many of the things. You're showing here that you can query the metrics with the metrics v2 API. I assume there might be plans going forward with DQL as well, or do you have any ideas what's coming, what's like looking into the future?
There will be. So at the moment, our V2 environment APIs are still well supported, but we do plan to bring in native support for platforms. So actually leveraging some of our SDKs and the OAuth authentication flow to get the data natively and get the data from Grail as well using DQL. It's much faster. Our extensions will also have support for adding DQL queries, so it only makes sense that we bring the full support to this.
Awesome. Then another question, because this video will be available on YouTube as well as on Dynatrace University, and people will then, I think it's easy to follow everything you've done. Will we be able to also share the plugin that you built here, the extension on Git? Can we just upload it to the GitHub repository that comes along with this observability clinic?
Absolutely, yeah. We
Perfect.
can upload everything that we've done, and I can also share the details of that Prometheus endpoint, because it is something that's
It's
a
publicly
demo
available.
and
Yeah.
it's not one of mine. So it's public information, so everyone can repeat these steps.
So folks, just to in the description of the video, you will get a link to a GitHub repository that kind of goes hand in hand with this episode, where you can find the code that Radu created today. So while it should be very easy to follow his steps, it's still always good to see the actual blueprint of what you've created. So it's awesome. Yeah.
And on our developer pages, so this is a link that I'll share with everyone as well. Our developer focused documentation is moving on developer.dynatrace.com. We have a section for extensions, which is currently just the add-on for VS Code, but we'll soon be moving all of our do-it-yourself guides in here, so that people have one clear place where to find everything. We have a couple of guides that people can follow, but we also have full documentation on exactly what triggers these interaction points within an extension, so that people don't have to guess. So if it's something that you have to click on to get it, what word do you need to click, or where do you need to be to get those insights? For example, the fact that when I'm here on charts, I can generate charts based on the metrics that I have in my definition. People shouldn't have to guess that. We have it documented.
Yeah. That's awesome. You put a lot of effort into building this extension, and obviously you, as said, you are building extensions every day. So having a Visual Studio Code extension like this handy makes a lot of sense, makes you more productive, will in the end also now help our users out there. That's really nice.
And if we have a little bit of time, I'd like to show just one more feature, because this came straight from our customers. It came with them wanting to either modify slightly the official extensions that we built, or just using them for inspiration. How did they do that? How does this extension actually work? So what I'll do, I'll just close these files for now. I'll create a new workspace, and I'll call this download demo. And I'll use this as the project folder. And because I've used that plus button, as soon as VS Code starts activating all of the extensions, it will automatically trigger the initialization workflow. So I'll do the same thing. I'll do a schema version. I won't download it again. I'll use existing certificates because we've just generated them. And this time I'll choose an existing 2.0 extension. So at this point, VS Code connects to my environment and asks, okay, which one do you want to use? And these are Dynatrace official ones. So for example, let's say that insights into disk devices, how did they do that? How does this extension work? I'll just click it from there. It downloads it from my environment. It unpacks it in my environment. And I can now browse that, something that, Dynatrace builds by best practice. I can now adopt that best practice in my own extensions. Of course, it comes with a lot of red, because it's built for schema 233, but I selected 275. So to fix that, I can just run a command, which is again very useful, load schemas. And at any point I can switch to a different version. So I'll just go to 233. It will download it, get set up, and all that red went away because I now have it again in sync.
Cool. So again, great tip. So have a look at all the extensions that Dynatrace has developed. You can just basically import it into your own extension as a starting package and then modify it and then maybe, make it better, upload it again as your own extension. It's really nice. Yeah. Really cool.
So this is just a sub, if you can believe that this is still just a subset of all that
Yeah.
this project can do.
Uh-huh.
So just to kind of wrap it up, what our focus is and really what we want to do with this project. First of all, Python is at the very start, we barely have enabled it. So our first focus is to bring in support for Python projects as well. As people will be converting from the old framework to the new one, we want to add some workflows in there to automate some of that conversion so that we can translate things into the new framework. Personally, I'm working on an extension simulator, so you don't have to always send those extensions to the cluster and to the one agent and active gates. You can get the insights straight into your editor and simulate them using those one agents and active gates. And for SNMP, we have a set of nib files already in the active gate. We can actually get a lot of insights into the editor by browsing those files, and this is something that is also on the roadmap. And both myself and a couple of teammates will probably reach out to you to have a few more other sessions kind of similar to this to showcase those specific areas.
Always happy to do so. It's great to have you present and show us what the product and the platform can do and what people can do and how to extend it. So yeah, every time, very happy to host you.
Very final bit. I'm sure you'll share these, or if not, I'll post them in that GitHub repository. Links to our documentation and links to the GitHub repository for this VS Code extension, because we want to keep it open. We want to keep it open source. So if people have a contribution, find an issue with it, or have an idea for a feature that helps them, GitHub is the place to open these conversations and have us actually work on it.
Very nice. Radu, thank you so much. Just like your first session that you did, where you inspired everyone with your taxi fleet. I think this was the cool example that you had, and I should have brought this up in the very beginning. That I think it was a really well-received session back then to show what Dynatrace can do. This is a great follow-up. I know this is very specific, very technical for people that want to build extensions. But I think that this is the best way to get started with building your own extensions. Now, I have one question on Prometheus. You brought up the Kafka example. I would assume Kafka is a very, let's say, common component. Are we planning, or is there any place where people can say, okay, what extensions are actually maybe out there and planned, so that they either don't build it from scratch if something is already built, or if something is already planned to be built? Is there a good way to say, a place in the community where people can go and say, hey, is somebody building something on this already, or shall I build it?
Absolutely. So definitely our online hub for Dynatrace is the place to keep an eye on what's already planned and what we've already started working on. So whenever you search for a technology, you will get a view of all extensions. Sorry, I wanted to type F5. All extensions that are ready to use in there. The tile looks like this. We also have tiles that will have a logo of soon. And that means we've kind of already started making a plan for it and started working. And it's best if you contact us through either your account executive or just at extensions@dynatrace.com and ask about the progress of that, because there's no point you starting something new. If the technology doesn't show up at all, you can engage with us again, either through the email or on the community. We have a space on the Dynatrace community for extensions. So you can, of course, open a thread in there as part of our extend section, we have our little space in there for extensions. You can, of course, create a question similar to this one, where maybe you're asking, hey, does anyone have a solution for monitoring that? Has anyone written? We sometimes see extensions that are not necessarily on the hub, but are created by members of the community, and they're available through their personal GitHub. Of course, they don't come with support the same way an official Dynatrace would, but it's a starting point if there's nothing else out there.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you, Radu. Thank you so much again. We will upload this. Well, as you're watching this, it is already been uploaded to YouTube and to Dynatrace University. And also make sure to check out all the links. And whenever you have a chance to see Radu or some of his team members on the community or in real life, I think it's definitely a good opportunity to give them a high five, because it's great work. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Andy. Always a pleasure.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone. See you. Bye-bye.
Bye.